Responsible acquisition in an AI world. Yes, we often talk about responsible AI, but what recently caught my attention, thanks to a post from one of my fellow colleagues, that there is an aspect called responsible acquisition. That is, when you are doing procurement, when you are doing sourcing, when you are working with other agencies, other entities, you need to do that in a responsible manner because you may be sourcing, you may be procuring something which is an AI system or something which has elements of AI being incorporated into it. And then as I came into concept or came into touch with this concept, I also learned that there has been something issued by the government of US, the White House as we call it, Executive Office of the President, and the Department of Office of Management and Budget, wherein they pushed a memorandum to the heads of executive departments and agencies saying advancing the responsible acquisition of AI in government. So, as I came across that, the question was it's relevant because it helps us create or enhance the digital trust as we usually talk about. I thought we should talk to or talk about it with someone. And I found none other than Dr. Carrie Miller, who always talks about responsible procurement or responsible AI and combined responsible procurement in the AI world. So, who better than her to go and talk about it? So, let's go and talk to Dr. Carrie Miller about this important topic.
Hello, and welcome to the Fit for Privacy podcast with Punit Bhatia. This is the podcast for those who care about their privacy. Here, your host, Punit Bhatia, has conversations with industry leaders about their perspectives, ideas, and opinions relating to privacy, data protection, and related matters. Be aware that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are not legal advice. Let us get started.
So, here we are with Dr. Carrie Miller. Welcome, Dr. Carrie, to the Fit for Privacy podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. And it stems from your post few weeks back when you posted about this directive which was issued to the federal agencies. And I was curious to understand what is this responsible acquisition in the AI world? Can you talk about it?
Yeah, we expected this memo to come. OMB, Office of Management and Budget, which is a section of the White House, they had released a memo in March, M2410, and this is an extension of that. So M2410 did some things with organizational structure and expectations on that front with reporting and things like that. This is the extension of that really gets to operationalizing AI. And so they focused on acquisition.
Mhm.
And the areas that they focused on were how they expect these agencies to collaborate internally and intra-agency collaborations. So that was really fascinating. They really focus on rights and safety, which is a little different than the EU. EU would call that high risk. And they had a couple of call outs with specific AI technologies that was interesting. And they were very focused on competition in acquisition.
So essentially, we are talking usually about AI being responsible. Here we are talking about the world is in the, or to say, the world has a lot of AI elements. And in that, everyone who's acquiring, that is procuring something, they need to be responsible in those acquisitions, like you mentioned, the collaboration between intra government entities or collaboration with external entities. But why did they need to talk about it now? What was the hurry? What was the reason at this moment?
Yeah, I think AI governance, once you set up your organization and you have people in place, so we have a lot of chief AI officers in place now, and we have policies in place. We know what, the right kind of AI is that we should buy. The next step is process. How exactly do we do that? So this was a logical next step. It's very timely. A lot of states actually are way ahead of the federal government on this perspective. So it was time.
So it was time, but it is right now in context of government agencies only. So it's mandated or meant for them. Are there any
Federal,
exclusions?
federal government. Yes,
Federal
yes,
government,
yeah,
not state.
correct.
Okay, that's interesting. And then I think you mentioned earlier when we were having a chat that some agencies are included or excluded, sorry. Which ones are the ones which are excluded?
Yeah, all of these memos and executive orders and things that are not, well, even actually some of the legislation that has come through, which we have very little of here in the US, they tend to step around military or intelligence uses, anything that's going to protect the homeland or, for security of the homeland.
Mm-hmm.
I believe why they do that. In fact, my understanding why they do that is those are very different measurements that you use whenever you're evaluating AI. So, evaluating AI to understand your national security versus life and safety risks, you tend to do different trade offs for that type of AI. So, this is your average run of the mill AI that can impact everyday humans, citizens that need welfare benefits or unemployment benefits or just your average stuff.
Yeah. And you mentioned that the EU does its own stuff. So how is it different from EU? Because EU has its own EU AI Act, which encompasses a lot more and talks about AI being responsible. Here we are picking one element, that is acquisition, that in the AI world, and then focusing on the federal agencies. So what's so special that this is going to help maybe say create trust or create digital trust, or how is it going to be impactful?
Yeah, I mean, the end game absolutely is digital trust.
Mm-hmm.
I think, in my opinion, what the main difference to me, what stood out was the EU AI Act calls out high risk AI. Everyone is talking about high risk AI. Sometimes we don't understand exactly in the weeds what that means. But here they specifically called out rights and safety, and they were really clear about it. There are existing laws on the books that say what people have rights to, and
Mm-hmm.
there are expectations about people's safety, their physical safety and their mental health safety. So we have laws around that stuff. So they kind of grounded it in what we have existing today. Unfortunately, that kind of makes it a narrow memo because it doesn't cover some of the things that the EU AI Act does, but it's still pretty good. So that was an important distinction, I thought.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. That's an important distinction, though it always makes me wonder why do they go specific and why don't they go with a full-fledged legislation? But that's always for the debate.
That's politics. Yes, exactly. How much time do you have?
Yeah. And then you also talked about it applies to applications or models or Gen AI or biometric applications. So what's happening in that space?
That part was really interesting. So they specifically called out biometric, which thank goodness they did, because we have rights to non-discrimination, but to finally specify biometric issues and data collection around that and safety in the data sets and robustness in those data sets. So it does a great job covering those aspects of expectations when you are procuring these types of systems. But they did surprise me with the generative AI approach. Um, they require a couple of things. One is a very hardened approach to focusing on attempts to misuse and abuse these types of systems. And that's mainly internally. So those were words that were directed to internal agencies. Be careful with these things, they can be dangerous. Make sure your people are trained. That was great. The one thing that really surprised me was their requirement to get multiple bids when you're going to select one of these things. So don't just naturally, oh, we like Chat GPT, so that's what we're going to use. No, sir. It has to be a bid from multiple of these. And they ask in the memo, they specifically state, look for fit for purpose, identify your mission, understand what these models are doing underneath. How were they trained? Does this make sense for what you're trying to do? And so I was surprised that they did that, and I thought it was a great nugget.
Indeed, I mean, when you do a read of it, there are elements which are good, but those elements are just touched, dropped, and left there
Yeah.
because it doesn't go deep into what you should do. Like it says, you should protect rights of individuals when biometrics are used.
Mhm.
Now, what do you have to do? Of course, they talk about bit on privacy and security, but very, very, very high level. So you can go as deep as the EUA Act, or you can leave it there saying I've done my bit, because they don't enforce anything like rights impact assessment or any conformity checks or any quality checks. That they leave it up to you. It's more high level stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say it's just a tick underneath of high level. I think they expect, they have the structure in place for every agency to have a chief AI officer, and they've anointed that person with certain duties and expectations about, the values and principles of the United States and what we see and expect of AI. And so I think they are just expecting that each agency will be responsible. And so we're not going to say too much. We expect you, in your context, in your use cases, to understand how to make this stuff work so that it is rights and safety respecting. And so they don't really go too aggressively on prescribing some things.
Yeah, I see that they don't prescribe, but in terms of being touching upon everything or anything, they have been quite comprehensive. They touched
Mhm.
almost all aspects, saying you are expected to do this. I mean, even saying you should have metrics, you should have testing, and you should do risk
Yeah.
management, data management. So they haven't, in other way, left anything out. And when we say it's a memo, how does a memo stand in the US landscape? Like here we have local laws, EU laws, and EU laws can be directives or regulations. Where does it fit in?
Yeah, insert giant sigh here. I wish it was a law. I think there are
Mhm.
some laws coming behind this. Senator Peters has something in the works that I hope gets through. Memos, if we have a change at the top, a memo can be just dismissed.
No, it can be dismissed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So it's more of a note, a communication to agencies saying we expect you to do this, but since it comes from the office of the president,
Yes.
it carries the weight.
Correct. These are our operating rules. So says the big guy. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But they do not need to be aligned, harmonized, synchronized, fine-tuned as a law would need to be, because then you have to be more precise, because then it's the rule of law and it can be interpreted in the court. So this doesn't have any value, but from a government perspective, agencies can be questioned, why didn't you do this? We told you so.
Exactly. That is exactly right. Yeah. Plus, a law is much harder to undo with each, regime change.
That's also true.
Yeah.
And then, okay, it's for agencies, it's for accusation, but there's some good stuff in there. And there are many private corporations or public also saying we don't have a law, we don't have a guidance. Can they or should they take this as guidance and maybe incorporate into their day-to-day uh, purchasing at least, because that's where this fits in?
Uh, I would if I were them. um, there are some good guiding practices of how to conduct acquisition. So one example is, and this is just, you can adopt some of the processes that they're recommending, but also if you're selling to the government, you need to understand this and be ready for how they're going to approach you for requests for bids. Adopting some of the practices that are in here. For example, they kind of have opened up and given permission to use different contract types or different approaches to contracts. So when you deal with AI, you might not have all the answers when you go into that contract. For example, if you buy pencils, you might say, I need an 8-inch pencil with an eraser on the end that's going to be 2 centimeters, and the pencils need to be sharpened and whatever. You're familiar with that territory. With AI, you're less familiar with the territory. And so they've offered up the idea to say, look, use a statement of objectives, use a performance work statement, use these broader, more slightly more ambiguous ways to approach this stuff. And then on the backside, use a quality assurance surveillance plan so that you're monitoring everything as you go through. By the way, also get some good training so you're not, too far off when you're doing that stuff. So that's a great practice no matter what kind of a business you're in, a government or private sector. But if you're selling to the government, you need to understand that they're going to have a lot of questions for you. That's the kind of bid they're going to ask you to do. Is it's going to feel a little more ambiguous. They're going to expect that you're going to explain some training data stuff and some privacy information and models and how they work and how you're monitoring them. And the expectation, I think, is raised now.
I can agree with you. The expectation is raised, and as you rightly pointed out, if you're going to be selling it to the government agencies, this is what they're going to be asking you.
Yeah.
So you better incorporate it. And if you have incorporated it, then it helps you sell to the normal corporate world. But if there's an organization who are not selling to government agencies, they can still take learning because it is
Yeah.
broad but still useful in terms of pointing out what are the factors or what are the things to take care of.
Mhm.
And as with EU AI Act, companies are already, what do you say, grappling to figure
Yeah.
out, because right now the push is we are not high risk system, but it's not about high risk system. It is about you knowing that you have a system which is an AI system, classifying it, and then incorporating the best practices. And of course, if it's high risk, you go far and go further and further in terms of making sure that you have enough documentation and enough conformity requirements
That
complied with.
is that is the interesting trick. Yeah. Mhm.
But on that part, I think in the EU AI Act, when it talks about acquisition, there it's a bit light. Don't you think so?
Yes, I was so surprised. And even there's a new bill for acquisition in the EU, and it does not really cover AI. It sort of revamps acquisition in general, but just for the purposes of better competition. But it does not touch AI in the way that it really needs to.
Seems
Yeah,
like they missed that part because
yeah,
they're over relying on building AI and not on acquiring AI or acquiring services in which AI can be incorporated.
right. Yeah, it is a little bit different. You don't
Because,
throw away all of your acquisition activity or processes, but you have to augment them to address these unique needs.
yeah, like in this one also, they talk about the IP and the other aspects, which is still a gray zone
Right.
because it's easy to say, like they say, make sure the IP is respected, but what does it mean?
That's exactly right. And this in the OMB memo, they also talk a lot about lock-in, vendor lock-in, they call it. They also call it promoting competition, which is two sides of the same coin. Depends on if you want to smile or frown, I guess. Um, but they really get into, disclosing licensing agreements and making sure that there's an understanding of the entire value chain underneath of these systems so that when you go to switch to a different vendor, you are not held hostage because, oh, they didn't tell you you were on Mistral versus Llama versus OpenAI. It's a pretty invasive investigation whenever they do look into these systems and for the purposes of promoting competition and not getting locked into something.
Yeah. And I think in a way it's good, but in a way, as we said, it's not the law. So we will have coming months and years to determine which shape, which direction it goes. Because to me, it starts with what is an AI system. It does define it, but since it's not a law, who defines what's an AI system, and
Yeah.
that's where it will get in. But
Mhm.
it's good to have this because it was long overdue and some guidance, some direction from the government.
Agreed.
So with that, I think this for this topic, that would be it. Unless you have some final message or few words to add.
Well, can't wait to see how it plays out. They have a couple of deadlines coming up. I think November 1st, they have to identify the contracts existing
Mhm.
that are subject to this new rule. And by December 1st, they have to have everything incorporated into those contracts. So that's fast.
Yes, that is indeed fast.
Yeah.
So I think as our episodes go live with a delay, by the time our episode is live, people would have identified the contracts and everything.
Mm.
But what we want to share to our audiences is there is the dimension of responsible acquisition in the AI world while we talk about AI being responsible in itself.
Yeah.
So, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, what would be the best way?
I would say probably my LinkedIn would be Dr. Carrie Miller on LinkedIn. You should be able to find me or look up AI procurement. I usually write a lot about that.
Sure. So, with that, I would say thank you so much, Dr. Carrie Miller. It was wonderful to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you liked the show, feel free to share it with a friend and write a review. If you have already done so, thank you so much. And if you did not like the show, don't bother and forget about it. Take care and stay safe. Fit for Privacy helps you to create a culture of privacy and manage risks by creating, defining, and implementing a privacy strategy that includes delivering scenario-based training for your staff. We also help those who are looking to get certified in CIPPE, CIPM, and CIPT through on-demand courses that help you prepare and practice for certification exam. Want to know more? Visit www.fit4privacy.com. That's www.fit4privacy.com. If you have questions or suggestions, drop an email at hello@fit4privacy.com. Until next time, goodbye.